Right, I'm going to kick us off just to give you a little bit of introduction to Dawn and myself. Dawn is in accounting, I'm in education, I'm a teacher, and we're originally from KZN, so we come from a paddling background, but when we came up to Gauteng, we battled to find clean water. So we then got into mountain biking, and so it was always your 30, 40-kilometer rides, and then we discovered the Freedom Challenge, and we got into the Freedom Challenge, and we've both done a couple of race across South Africa's. We've done a few thousand milers, but we're very much weekend warriors. We're not great cyclists, but we kind of know how to keep going and keep cycling, and that's our cycling background. So I'm going to ask Dawn to kick us off and just give us a little bit of an introduction to the Silk Road Mountain Race. Where is it, what it's about, etc., etc. But I've just got to see. Okay, there we go. Dawn.
Okay, so I'll start. It's held in Kyrgyzstan, which is in Central Asia, and until Dave found out about this race, neither myself or most of our friends had ever heard of the place. You can see it's surrounded by Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and quite a large section of China. It's a former Soviet state, and there's quite a strong Russian influence when you go, particularly in Bishkek, which is the capital city. We flew into Bishkek via Dubai. We flew with Emirates. So it wasn't it was about an 8-hour and a 4-hour flight, so not too hectic. The Kyrgyz people have a strong nomadic culture. They take their flocks and herds up to the plains, the grassy plains during summer. So they're very nomadic. There are no fences. This is incredible riding through there. There are no fences. So you can ride anywhere. You can camp anywhere. It's very open. The people are very hospitable and friendly. The mountain range that kind of mostly surrounds it is called the Tian Shan mountain range. Quite a lot of high passes that we had to go over. Probably the highest one we went over was about 3,800 meters. So quite a lot of altitude. We spent a lot of days at above 2,000 meters, which was quite an adjustment. Their national drink is called kumis, and it's fermented maize milk. It's disgusting. It's revolting.
And you have to drink it.
Yeah. So we went to one of the restaurants in Bishkek, and they bring it to you as a free drink. So yeah, that was a challenge. They drive on the right-hand side of the road, which was quite freaky for us, coming from the left-hand side of the road. And when we were in Bishkek, we were riding around getting ourselves organized and supplies. When I cycle in the streets, I always make eye contact with drivers to make sure they've seen us and they don't run us over. And I'd made eye contact a couple of times and got these sort of strange looks. And then I realized I was making eye contact with the passenger and not the drivers. So adjusted that. The race is called the Silk Road Mountain Race. So it's a lot of the race is along the ancient Silk Road trade route that ran from China to the Mediterranean. We did the second edition, which was in 2019. Dave stumbled across the race. He's always finding these great races for us to do. And they had put out a YouTube video, and if you want to look at it, it's absolutely magnificent, called Wild Horses. A lot of wild horses in the country. And it's about a 30-minute video of the first race. And I watched it 3 times before we did the race. It was just absolutely spectacular. It's what they call a self-supported bike packing race. It is completely unsupported. We don't, here in this country, don't know, certainly not the races that we've done, are not purely unsupported like this is. The added challenge was that it's very remote. We left, the race started in Bishkek, in the capital. We left there on Saturday morning, and it was Monday morning before we reached another town. There was nothing, nobody, just wild mountain open for nearly 3 days of riding. They change the route a little bit every year, so it's not exactly the same route. They're trying to expose the country as much as possible and let people that come back every year get a different experience. And when we did it, the total distance was 1,705 kilometers with 27,000 meters of climbing. So it was pretty hectic. There were 6 South Africans that did it, David and myself as a pair. There was a father and son pair, and then there were 2 individuals. The father and son and 1 individual of the group finished. The rest of us had other issues, which we'll tell you about. The race is held in their midsummer, which is in August. As Piers said, they've just hosted 2022 now. And we finished in a town called Tolpin Atta, which was a lakeside resort. There was like a beach and what they call it's a glacial lake, called Issaquah. And it was quite interesting because it was like a beach and water and very festive at the end.
It's the Margate of Russia.
Yeah, pretty much. There were people swimming and all sorts of things. The cutoffs were very, very tight, especially for cyclists like us that are a bit slow. We had to do 120 kilometers a day to make the cutoffs, which with the amount of climbing involved and at altitude was pretty hectic. I think that's about all. Dave's going to give us a little bit of a rundown on what kit we took.
Okay, so this was our first real backpacking event. We took full suspension mountain bikes because that's what we had. Those were our only bikes, that's what we rode. So most probably not the ideal bikes to take. The majority of riders took hardtail mountain bikes. Some of them were on gravel bikes. So the advantage of the hardtails is that you could get a big frame bag into it and you could take more weight off your back. So those were our bikes. We ended up, those bikes weighed about 25 kilos each with all the kit on it, as well as a backpack of about 5 kilograms. So we had to carry a tent. We had to carry our tent, our cooking equipment, obviously sleeping bags. We took insulated mattresses. Dawn's going to talk about the weather just now. The weather's quite extreme simply because of the altitude. We took, so there were stages that we really enjoyed being on full suspension mountain bikes because some of the riding is fantastic and having that was great. We had to take obviously a full cooking setup and we carried 5 days worth of food. We didn't know when we were going to be able to get food, what food we could get. One of the mistakes we made was we carried 3 liters of water all the time. And obviously that's 3 kilograms. And that was a mistake. Well, I don't suppose it was a mistake, but we didn't need to because there are these magnificent glacial rivers all over the place. These turquoise rivers, you didn't even need water purifiers to drink the water. It really is magnificent. I think we got some pictures of them. All right, no bike shops en route. So you've got to know your way around the bike. If you have mechanicals, your nearest bike shop was in Bishkek at the start. So if you broke down and you didn't know how to fix it, you basically had to walk until you could get some sort of transport back to Bishkek. And then in the race, you obviously have to go back to where you went off route. There was plenty of water all over. And when we go again, we won't carry that much water, but we needed water for cooking. Most of the food we actually took food from South Africa because we didn't know what we were going to be able to get there. So we didn't get stopped on the plane with all the food. They don't really mind what you take in there. So we took dehydrated mince, we took smash, we took oats. So that was kind of our staple diet. When we found food was actually quite easy to come by. You could buy bread quite easily, lots of noodles. We were sick of noodles by the end, but it was good. In terms of clothing, we most probably had a disadvantage in terms of the European and American riders, simply because they are really geared for cold weather. And we took the best that we could get here, but it most probably wasn't good enough. So it really was cold on occasions. But we had decent kit that we could buy here. We were walking pharmacies. We took all sorts of medication with us. So Kyrgyzstan really is a third world country. Bishkek is a city like any city in the world, but outside Bishkek, there's very little. It really is herdsmen, shepherds out in the countryside. We had all sorts of inoculations before we went. We had rabies jabs, hepatitis, typhoid, tetanus. In hindsight, that's probably more likely to get rabies here than we are there. So that was a bit of a waste of money. But Dawn, tell us about the weather.
Okay, the weather was cold. You can see from that photo. There's our little tent.
It was our tent on night one. We made a few errors. Yeah. So we camped next to a river, above the tree line. That was a mistake, but we learned.
Although it's midsummer, it was really cold. Our first day, 2 hours into the race, it started raining, and it rained for 5 hours. So it doesn't matter how good your waterproof kit is, nothing is waterproof when it rains for that long. So we were pretty wet after that. And the temperature plummeted. It was really cold. That photo on the right, or on my right, it's Kyrgyzstan Pass, which is the first pass to go over. You can see it's got snow on it. It's very exposed. And we, like Dave said, we camped our first night above the tree line. We really wanted to get over the pass on the first night, but it was just too hard. So we stopped, and it was cold. First 3 days we had snow, sleet, rain, all sorts of crazy stuff. We did try and do some altitude training before we left. We went to Lesotho for a couple of days training there. I think, what was it, about 2,000 meters? I don't know if it helped. That was in April. This was in August. It does take a long time to really acclimatize to high altitude. The other thing we did was we did an overnight trip out into Mpumalanga with our kit. We tested everything before we left. We spent the night out. Dave's got a little thermometer on his back. It had dropped to -10. We had frost on our saddles. We were toasty warm in our tents. We thought we're good to go. It was freezing cold in the tent. I had my sleeping wear, extra, my cycling shirt, my waterproof pants, all sorts of extra clothing on to try and keep warm when we stayed in the tents. It was really cold. The water was cold when you had to cross them. Wet feet, nothing dries in a tent. I pretty much had wet feet and wet shoes most of the time. One of the big mistakes we made on one day was I think it was the second or third day, that the big rain and snow came barreling in as we were coming up over a pass. So we got to the top of the pass and stopped there and put our warm gear on, which is really stupid. We should have actually stopped before or after, where you're a little bit sheltered from the wind. So we were absolutely frozen, and then you're descending. So it was really, really cold that night, because now you've got no way of getting warm. We made ourselves our little, hot food, but it didn't really help. You'll see in the photos, most of the time I've got long sleeve shirt, long pants, because it was cold. Dave got hot on a couple of days, but for the most part, even when it was sunny, it was really cold. It was cold. It was really, really cold. Yeah. Okay, Dave can tell us a little bit about the type of riding that we enjoyed.
So just a little bit more about our bikes. We both were with 1x11 setups. For those of you who are cyclists, we were 1x11 setups. We had 1146 cassettes. Dawn had a 32 front chainring. I had a 34. So with that, we can ride everything around Gauteng that, if we go to Suikerbosrand, if we go to Breedsneck, even in Lesotho, we could ride anything. When we got there, that gearing just was way, way over geared. And I think part of it was the altitude, just getting air into your system. But when we go again, it will certainly, those 52 teeth grannies, you want that there. Because the reality is it's all about the climbing. Okay, it is just truly magnificent. So this Kyrgyzstan Pass, This is Kyrgyzstan. That was our pass, which we did on the end of day 1 and day 2. The pass is 55 kilometers long. So at the bottom of the pass is 800 meters above sea level, and it goes to 3,800 meters above sea level. So you're climbing 3,000 meters in 50 Ks. One of the difficulties with this was you were climbing passes that, so this pass on the right-hand side that you can see there, that took us, we actually went down there. That was fantastic. But we had to climb up the other side. And climbing up the other side literally took us about 6 hours. Now, that descent was with a great road. It was a 20-kilometer descent, but you did that in half an hour. And you've been climbing for 6 hours, half an hour descent. So it seemed like you were climbing the whole time, even though it was almost a circular route. Difficult. Yeah, it's all about the climbing. So one of the sections, there's lots of old Soviet hotels. There's a Soviet military road that we went out of checkpoint 2 on, and that basically had an 18% gradient to get out of there. So that was a serious push, come carry of bikes. Yeah, so we did a lot of walking, and the altitude contributed to that as well.
I mean, on that section, we were literally counting 10 steps, stop, breathe. And Jay was coming back to help me because I was so slow. It was really hard.
So, Dawn, Kyrgyzstan's a former Soviet republic. It's right on the border of China. It's quite militarized. Tell us a little bit about this.
So there was a section...
Sorry, a couple more photos about the climbing. I mean, you can't see it, but there's a rider coming up that hill, and it's snowing, and it's fun. So there were a couple of sections on single track, and that was when it was great having our full-size mountain bikes. So the riding, sometimes it was heartbreaking when you climbed up this pass and you couldn't ride down the other side because it was loose shale. But it was, generally speaking, it was dirt roads, equivalent of our district roads. Yeah. So certainly, so you didn't have to carry. That was the one thing. That Soviet road was the closest thing you came to carrying. So you could put as much as you could on your bike.
And quite frankly, if our bikes hadn't been as heavy as they were, we would have put our bikes on our backs and probably carried the bike up that because of the gradient. But the bikes were 25 kilos. I mean, there was just no ways we were going to be lifting that onto our backs, especially without any oxygen in your lungs. So, yeah. But their term of hike a bike is very much pushing. It's not Freedom Challenge carrying. So the Chinese border was quite a long stretch there was some tar, Chinese highway. This photo is taken on the dirt section. You can see there's 3 fences between Kyrgyzstan and China.
These weren't fences between South Africa and Zimbabwe. These are proper fences. Okay.
Yeah, the Chinese are quite militant about going into their country. There was a section they originally planned to have in the race that was technically on the Chinese side. There was a mountain range between China and where we were riding, and the Chinese government said, absolutely not, you may not ride there. This section, we had to have a border permit. There were, I lost count, I don't know, somewhere between 4 and 6 border checkpoints, and they checked us at every single one. We had to produce our passports and our border permit. When we turned onto this road, we were just started riding, and up ahead was a military vehicle parked on the side of the road. There were a few military guards hanging around. So Dave said to me, don't stop, just smile and wave and keep going, which I tried to do, but they flagged us down. And it was a bit intimidating. They were military, they were carrying, weapons. AK-47s. So the border permits were on Dave's phone. So he's now trying to find the permits, feeling a little bit flustered. And one of the guys starts talking to me. Obviously, the language is a huge problem there. They speak Kyrgyz. I think it's a dialect of Russian. It's the Cyrillic alphabet. So, even being able to read anything was impossible. I kind of had a feeling of what it must be like to be illiterate, because you couldn't even guess as to what was written there. Anyway, this one guy started talking to me, and he's going like this, like slitting his wrists, and I'm I don't know. I don't know. I'm like, okay. And Dave looks up and says, he wants a knife. So
Better at Siraj than
not killing. They pulled out a knife and they wanted to cut a fuel line. Their vehicle had broken down and they wanted a knife to cut the fuel line. And they even gave the knife back to us and waved us on our way. And then came screaming past us a bit later, waving. So it all ended well. At least he wasn't doing this. So that was the border pass. Do you want to tell us about the checkpoints?
Okay.
Race checkpoints.
So the next photo is actually my favorite photo of the whole thing. So this was on the other side of that road. So you had the three fences on one side, and you didn't see many houses there because most of the houses are these yurt camps. These white things are yurts. So it's basically something that gets put up in summer. It's felt most probably 1.5 centimeters thick, and I think that's obviously for warmth. And that was checkpoint 2. At the checkpoints, you had what are these cards called? Brevet card. And you had to get them stamped at the checkpoints. There were 3 checkpoints in the race. This is a better close-up of the yurt. Basically, it's where the shepherds live during summer. They take it down, they go back to the city, they go back to Bishkek. There are not too many cities in Kyrgyzstan. Got quite a small population. Dawn, toasty warm. So we stayed in the yurt on one night. We stayed in the yurt at checkpoint 2. Checkpoint 2 is where our race went a little bit pear-shaped. So in terms of the race, they had quite strict cutoffs. So we worked out beforehand that we had to do 120 k's a day. The problem is at climbing. But we were checkpoint 1. I think we were 8 hours ahead of the cutoff. Checkpoint 2, we had made up a bit of time. We were 12 hours ahead of the cutoff. And then, Dawn, tell us what happened at checkpoint 2.
So at both of these, the checkpoint 1 and checkpoint 2, checkpoint 1 we just went through, checkpoint 2 we stayed overnight. The local people hosted those and they provided us with food there. Because we're slow, we wanted to leave at around about 2 o'clock in the morning of the next day. And they said to us, no problem, there'll be breakfast available for you. Excellent. Went through to the mess yurt, and so one of the meals they have is rice plov, which is a rice with veggies and the occasional block of meat, and the noodle soup. There's no way that rice was going down my throat. It was just too stodgy. Dave ate the rice. I dished up some noodle soup. It was barely lukewarm. Golden rule: you must eat hot food. If the food's lukewarm, you're going to get into trouble. But I was in a bit of a state. It was very early in the morning. I didn't really feel much like eating. I knew we had a very big day ahead of us. Needed to get as much food in as possible. So I ate as much of that noodle soup as I could. We then headed out. We picked up that Soviet road, had some awesome riding on single track, stopped for our breakfast stop, 2 mouthfuls, the whole lot came up. So then I thought, okay, I'm just not going to eat. So for the rest of the day, I basically went on water and didn't eat at all. We stopped at a small village just before our overnight stop, which was going to be in the town of Naran. We bought junk food. That went down and stayed down. When we got to Naran, poor Dave. The hotel we checked into didn't do dinner. So we had to go back into town to find food. I do not want noodles for dinner. Done. So we rode around the town trying to find something other than noodles, which was quite hard. And we found some pizza, which we waited an hour for. I struggled to get it down. Went to sleep. This I thought was indigestion, but unfortunately, during the course of the night, that came up and I was just vomiting and vomiting and vomiting. It was actually not so nice. Passed out after that, and I didn't wake up again until the next afternoon sometime. They said I was out cold.
So Dawn basically slept for 24 hours. So with the food poisoning, so basically we were 12 hours ahead. We're 12 hours behind. So we withdrew. So what we did was we decided to tour. So we toured. We made our own route.
We used
Komoot.
I don't know if any of you heard of Komoot. It's a mapping program. The organisers, Komoot was one of the sponsors of the race, and they'd arranged for us to have a Kyrgyzstan map that we could download, and then using the program, we were able to design a little route to get to the finish. Our bike boxes and an overnight bag were at the finish, so we had to get there to get that stuff back. So we made our own little route to get to the finish using Komoot, and then you could use it offline. Of course, one of the big problems is there's very, very little cell phone reception. So while we were in Naryn, while we had cell phone reception, we were able to design our little route, and then we used the cell phone to navigate that last section. We had dynamo hubs to charge our devices and things, because obviously sleeping out there's no power. Sorry, say that again?
No, there weren't actually. So I've got Graham's hubs now, but we borrowed before we went, and that kept us charged because there was just no electricity. So that worked quite well for us.
Even as the checkpoints?
No.
So the youth camps.
So repeating the...
No, I think let's not take any questions at the moment, because the audience can't hear. So we'll just take all the questions.
Okay.
We'll just take all the questions afterwards.
All right. So the question was about dynamo hubs, just for those online, and we did have dynamo hubs, and that's how we kept all our devices charged.
And you asked about the power at the checkpoint. So the two checkpoints that we went through were yurt camps. There's no power. It's very, very rural, very rural. There was no bathing or showering facilities at the yurt camps, and the toilets were rather gross, long drops, sort of out to the side. Yeah. You can tell us about the tour.
All right, our tour, it was great. So the nice part about touring was it took the pressure off. So we didn't have to do the 120 Ks a day. So that was great, and we still saw the spectacular scenery. One of the interesting things about Kyrgyzstan is there are these huge monuments everywhere. And when I say huge, I mean, they are massive. That bird doesn't fit into this room. All right, and they are in the middle of nowhere, and so we're not quite sure of the significance of them, but that's a yak. So So just in terms of the Kyrgyz people, they are fantastic people. So language is a real problem. Google Translate was the best we could.
And that wasn't always that accurate.
Yeah. So some of the things that happened to us, the four of the South Africans, we stopped at that shop, and you can see a bit of the Cyrillic alphabet there. But Dawn and I are used to sitting on outside garages and eating pies, and they weren't happy with Dawn sitting on the ground. So the people from the shop came and gave her a cushion. We pitched our tent on one night. We saw some yurts down the bottom, and we saw a car coming up the valley. And these people were saying, "No, come and sleep with us." Now it took us about 45 minutes to set up camp and break camp every time. And we'd already set up camps, so we turned them down on that one. On the one night we were looking for accommodation, we were going through a section of towns, and Google Translate.
This was when we were touring, so it wasn't on the remote section of the actual race. Yeah.
So we're touring, and Google Translate, we looked for guest house. And the phone came out, and a lady came running. She said, "No, come with us." And these people invited us into their house, and they had supper for us, they had drinks for us. And bear in mind, we're sitting there and we can't communicate. Right, there's just nothing. They moved out of their bedroom that night, and we slept in their bed. So the hospital, now we are two smelly cyclists who haven't bathed for a number of days. And it really does ask you, would I do that? Someone comes and knocks on my door in Centurion, will I invite them and move out of my bed? Okay, they're great people.
They did let us shower.
They did let us shower. So it's predominantly a Muslim country. which is interesting. So we knew a little bit about Muslim religion. So we knew to take our shoes off before we went in, which you could see was appreciated. One interesting thing was the ladies and the men do not use the same toilets. So in this house we stayed in, the ladies' toilet was literally 150 meters down the garden. It was a long drop. The men's toilet was inside and was lovely flushing toilet. Now, Dawn was an infidel Christian because she went to the men's toilet. And she even showered in the men's shower. So interesting, it's very third world. Dawn mentioned no fences, which is really one of the highlights. So this family we stayed with owned an apple orchard. And the uncle, as they called him, he looked after the orchard during the day. We couldn't understand. No, the husband went out at night and he had to go and look after the orchard. We thought, what are you looking after your orchard for? And he literally had to be on duty all night to stop the cows eating the apples. And so it really is a third world country, but extremely hospitable, and we felt really welcomed there. Dawn?
And safe.
And
I
safe.
was quite sort of nervous, like being a pitch our tents, like in the middle of just anywhere, and our bicycles are going to be outside the tent all night. Are they still going to be there when we get up in the morning? And actually didn't even cross our minds when we were there. South Africans, that's rare occurrence. So
Dawn, tell us about what it costs to go to Kyrgyzstan.
So it was a ridiculously cheap, well, in terms of what cost the international trips can cost. It was one of the attractions. Airfares were $8,000 each. When you consider what we're paying for a airfare to Cape Town, it's not too bad. Return, yes. We flew Emirates, so it was a decent airline. The stretch from Dubai to Bishkek was a code-share. It was one of their budget airlines, but still, it was fine. Our hotels cost us between 160 and 200 rand a night each. Food was also unbelievably cheap. On the Monday when we got into this first village, we came past the little sign that said Katja's Guest House. It was one of the few times we actually had English. So we stuck our heads in there, and this lady obviously knew about the race and had been prepared. There were a couple of other riders there. She had a spread across the table, tea and coffee. We sat and ate our full, drank several cups of tea. It cost us 30 rand each. It was just, it was ridiculous. It was our last night there. Again, I was tired of noodles. We found a little burger kiosk. And again, communication is a little bit tricky. So they had the menu there, and we were looking and we were pointing at two chicken burgers. Then I saw chicken and cheese. I said, no, let's have chicken and cheese. I said, no, 2 of those, 2 chips, 2 Cokes. We ended up with 4 burgers. So 2 chicken burgers, 2 chicken and cheese burgers, 2 chips, 2 Cokes. Cost us 80 rand. You can really buy 1 burger for that. So very, very affordable place. I looked up, currently you're paying 21 cents to 1 som, which is their currency. So incredibly affordable. We had to buy US dollars here in cash and exchange that over there for som. They won't take currency. Surprise. So you've touched on the food.
Will we go back? So that's the real question. So Dawn and I, this is now on our bucket list. So we're going to go back, but we're not going to do the race. We're going to just go back and tour. And, where we can ride 50 Ks a day, and magnificent fly fishing in the rivers, and really just enjoy it and take more photographs. You've seen some of the photographs. It is beyond spectacular. So, and cheap for South Africans. So South Africans should be going there just on holiday, even if you're not a cyclist. Amazing. So if you are a skier or hikers, this is an amazing place to go.
You have to go in summer. August is kind of like the month, the window month of when you can go there. Heavy snowfalls. Even in Bishkek, it was like 30 degrees and there was snow on the mountains surrounding us. It was quite weird, actually, the snow. So you would have to go during the summer months because the passes you wouldn't be able to get over any other time of the year. So,
Are there any questions for us?
Sorry, with the questions, will you just repeat themselves in the audience?
okay, your question was? 2019. Yeah.
So the question was what year did we go? And
Yeah,
2019.
So it was the second edition of the race. So it was still in its infancy. Okay, so the question was, did they skip any years for COVID? I think they definitely did 2020, but I think 2021, and they've just had 2022.
So in many respects, it was surprising that they held this year's race because Kyrgyzstan, being a former Soviet republic, very similar situation, and so we were very much on the western side. Yes, it was the western side of Kyrgyzstan. There is still some conflict with Otherstan on the eastern side. So, yeah, you've got to do those things. You've got to get that background beforehand.
How many days did you actually cycle?
How many days did we actually cycle? We withdrew on day 7. So on the Friday, we started on Saturday. We withdrew on the following Saturday. So we were out of it for Saturday. And then I think we were Sunday, Monday, and we got to the finish on Tuesday. So it's 10 days. Yeah.
And how many cyclists entered the race? I didn't see any photos of anyone else up at the side.
How many entered the race?
So the question is, how many cyclists entered the race? There were about 150. Yeah. So predominantly Americans, Canadians, and Europeans.
What percentage finished?
It was quite low, if I remember correctly, the percentage of finishes. Yeah.
So this year's most probably, I'm more familiar with this year's statistics. So this year, I think 136 started and 70 odd finished.
Why did they make the cutoff so onerous? 120 days with 23,000 meters of time seems really beyond most amateur.
Certainly, but beyond so the cutoffs are very tight for the likes of us. The guy that won this year did it in 7 days or something. I mean, they next level. And I think
that's the point. I'm not really trying to attract pros.
I don't know who they're aiming at. Yeah.
So the reality is, if Dawn hadn't got sick, we would most probably have finished. All things going well. So we were pushing hard, but we didn't. So we most probably rode between 12 and 14 hours a day, which we can do. We can do that. So on the Freedom Challenge, we've ridden 18, 20 hours a day. So we're kind of used to riding that. The thing that we were not used to was the altitude and the climbing.
How much it cost to take our bikes? So we flew Emirates, and we had a baggage limit, and our bikes were included in that.
So we didn't pay anything extra for our bikes.
Some of the airlines do, we did a whole lot of homework. We had to tell Emirates before we flew. And we were seriously impressed. Emirates are really impressive. We coming home, we had an hour between our connecting flights to get to our connecting flight. Now, if any of you have been to Dubai, we drove for 45 minutes just about to get from the one terminal to the other. And we thought there is no ways our bikes are going to be in Joburg when we land. And they were. So they were really, really impressive. A lot of riders, even this year, flying from Europe, had nightmares of bicycles going missing and arriving kind of after the start. So it's quite a real problem.
So from South Africa, you've basically got two choices of getting there. You can either go via Turkey or Dubai. And Dubai seems to be the better one. More bikes get there going via Dubai.
Can you ask Lewis, our host, our Zoom host, if there are any questions from the Zoom audience?
Lewis, have we got any questions?
we've just got one from Alan Smith, and he just wanted to know where you would recommend...
Talk to your microphone.
Yeah, I've got a new laptop. I'm reading from the one screen to the other. Okay. So Alan Smith says, where would you recommend to cycle tour and for what length of time?
Did you hear that? Okay, so someone was asking where you would cycle tour and for how long?
Yes.
So I think I can answer that. So I think in terms of cycle touring, it's a process. So in the last 2 weeks, I've done 2 overnight cycle tours, and I just leave from my back door. And you go, and so last Friday I cycled to Bronkhorstspruit. I stayed in Bronkhorstspruit and I cycled back again. So that's a good way of finding out whether you like it or not. So, and you can build it up as you go.
I think you're speaking specifically in Kyrgyzstan.
Specifically in Kyrgyzstan, well, yeah.
So,
I don't know what he was...
So, bikepacking.com is a really very nice website, and that has a lot of routes. I think it's got a very nice route for Kyrgyzstan. I'm not sure whether the race routes are available on the Silk Road Mountain Race website. We ourselves would like to put something together, doing sort of maybe 50 to 80 Ks a day, probably 10 days to 2 weeks at the most, 10 days. I get homesick. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers the question enough.
I think it would. Kun asks, visas, vehicle rental possibilities, sufficient boarding and lodging.
So Lewis, the vehicle, so the question was, can you rent vehicles to go there once you're there, and sufficient boarding and lodging? I would say yes. So why I say yes, I can't say definitively, but there were quite a lot of Lexus 4x4s and Toyota Land Cruisers around. They were basically the only new vehicles, and they looked like tourists. And certainly there is accommodation. I think while the people in the yurts are welcoming, simply because they see it as a little bit of revenue as well. So they won't ask you for money, but it's expected that you pay.
So the tourist industry is very much in its infancy. They are trying to grow it. I mean, it is a beautiful country to visit. It's definitely something you want to put on your bucket list. As Dave said, even not necessarily cycling, hiking, 4x4ing, horse trekking. There is, I think it's called Nomads, is one of the tourist, what do you want to call them, service providers. And they would be somebody worth contacting that would be able to give you a lot of information, put together maybe a tour package if you were wanting to do something by vehicle. Mark wanted to ask something.
You mentioned the fishing. Growing number of people like fishing. What did you see there?
So the question was about fishing in Kyrgyzstan. So they have got phenomenal streams, and apparently they've got all sorts of trout in them. And next time we go, I will have a fishing rod in my bag. Oh, we put it back.
Yeah. Actually, we had fish out of the lake at the finish, and it was very nice. I'm not coming from the coast, I'm not a big fan of freshwater fish, but this was actually very nice. You had a question.
So the question was, what is the Silk Road, and did we experience that? So basically the Silk Road was China's route to the coast for their trading route, yeah. So that was the Silk Road, and this is a portion of where those caravans used to go down. Sure, I don't know how they did it just on horses and in winter, but certainly you experienced what they would have seen there. It hasn't developed at all.
Right. Did we jump in there? You'll have to move Dave, because it's better to sit next to Dawn than today.
I feel like it's
That's better.